I love that shirt. That is awesome, bro.
I'm unburdened by what has been.
Brilliant, brilliant. Alrighty, let's do this.
When you're up against the wall and you cannot fall, so go off, go off, go off. Go off, so go off, go off, go off. Go off, go off, go off, go off. Go off, so go off, go off, go
Pete, it is awesome to have you back with us, all the way from the United States of America. These here free United States of America. I'm guessing you're pretty happy about the election result.
Well, I'm a libertarian at heart, but yeah, I'm pleased. I got a problem though. I keep staying up too late watching TikTok videos of liberal reactions to the election results. I have a sick sense of humor. I get hooked, and I got to stop watching this. It destroys my faith in humanity.
That is awesome. That is awesome. Folks, if you're new here, before we jump into anything else, we're going to start with a little bit of intro, opening banter in just a second. A couple of questions I want to ask Pete. And then what we're going to do is we are going to explain the rules, and then we're going to talk about our top 10, what we think are our top 10 war films. We're going to go back and forth. And then we're going to talk about our honourable mentions, and we have a new category we didn't have last time. We talked about our top 10 Westerns, and the new category is, are there films you think could be suitable for a family to watch on Christmas Day? You're full of turkey or whatever, and you're sitting around saying, let's watch a film.
But you didn't say that. You said pick some that a family could cozy up and watch on Christmas, and I just don't usually equate war movies with the Prince of Peace. I mean, Die Hard and Lethal Weapon, technically Christmas movies, but I don't know.
That's right, mate. If they're good enough for the baby Jesus, then surely some war films are as well. So you will see how that goes. That could be a short list. But let's just start by, before we do any of that, if you're new here, please like this video. If you're not a subscriber, please subscribe and share with your friends and family. That all really, really helps the channel. Pete, how have you been before we go any further? You've actually become a dad since we last spoke, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we adopted a daughter a couple years ago. December 2nd was the 2-year anniversary of the adoption. So December 2nd is adoption day, but she came to live with us July 9th of 2022.
Wow.
So yeah, so she was 9 when she came to live with us, and she just turned 12 in November.
That's so awesome, and it's amazing following your progress. I get the little messages from you every now and then, and I see the stuff on social media, and man, you've clearly taken to being a dad. And she's a Kiwi girl. Well, she's got a Kiwi connection, right?
She's got some Maori blood. She's got some Maori blood.
Yeah. Oh man, she's in the right family, bro, with all that hunting and trapping. Yeah. That's a gift. I've got a question for you. What do you think about war films in particular it is that really appeals, I think particularly to men? What do you think the appeal is for men in a war film?
Well, I think there's a couple things. So I'll start with the least up to the biggest reason. So I think part of it is guys tend to sort of gravitate towards us versus them competitions. Yeah. Now, it's funny because the research shows, I think pretty definitively, that women tend to be more competitive than men.
Yeah.
But men are attracted to, competitive sport. The team. I'm on the team. Whose team is going to win, right? And so war movies have an element of that in it. That it's like, especially movies that are really fictionalized heavily, and so it's like we win, we lose. There's that. I think is part of it. Another reason that I think is just that guys like guns and and fighting, and and I think that's part of it. Number two, going up to number one reason, I think number two is that there are themes in war movies, honor and brotherhood, and friendship and bravery and things like that I think really appeal to men in different ways than they would to women. Now, that doesn't mean women can't be brave and courageous. And my daughter and I talk about that a lot, about being brave, what that means, being courageous, what that means. And war isn't the only way someone can be brave or courageous. But I think it's sort of like the default, like if you think about those virtues, most men have some mental schema of a conflict or of combat or something like that I have to be brave, right? But I think the number one reason is that God made us that way, not to like necessarily violence, but to be the protectors, and that in those instances where violence is the only answer, there isn't another answer there. That's what He made men for. He made men to fight and protect their family and do that kind of stuff when it has to be done. As unpopular as that might be in today's society to say that, if you're a man, you bear a certain amount of responsibility to be that person, and you don't get a pretend you don't. And when you do pretend you don't, it causes a lot of problems, and it causes a lot of difficulties in society, and it messes everything up. And the more people try to find some kind of mutually interchangeable environment where men and women are just don't have any real differences, you find that men and women actually exhibit those differences more. And so there's a lot of research that's come out of Sweden about that, where they've tried to make it just men and women are the same no matter what. And what's happened is there are more men doing men jobs and more women doing women jobs. And so it's sort of backfired on them. We're just made that way, So I like what Jordan Peterson says about, men should be an absolute monster, and capable of extraordinary violence, but have it under control. That's
a good way of summing it up, isn't it? I like what you've said there. I think one thing for me is I often think about particularly real life situations, not so much the fictional movies, war movies, but the actual accounts of real heroism or real theatres of war. And I think to myself, I often think, I wonder what I would be like under that test, under that intense pressure of that particular test. Would I equip myself as well as these men did or didn't, depending on what the case may be? Would I actually run? Would I cower and hide? Would I be, in shell shock? I think about, I often see it as sort of a sense of trying to ascertain my own strength and place in the world, really, as a man,
Mm-hmm. Well, I think guys want to prove themselves, and society, at least in first world nations, things have gotten so soft that how do you do that?
Yeah.
How do you prove yourself? I mean, you can do, combat, sports or things like that, but it's just that's not the same, but I think guys have an innate desire to kind of prove themselves, that they can handle themselves, that they can handle bad stuff when it happens. And war movies, certainly have a certain element of some of that going on. I think, too, it goes back to themes, right? It goes back to themes in movies. And one of the themes that's really interesting, Chesterton, there's a quote in my office by Chesterton, and I know I'm going to mess it up, but it's something along the lines of people don't understand that men will resist a stronger opponent more than they will resist a weaker one. And the smallest glimpse that we can have in this earth of God's glory is to fight a losing battle and not lose.
Yeah, awesome.
And so the come from behind, the that all the odds are against this person in this situation or this group of men in this situation, and somehow, they're able to pull it out and triumph, and so I think that probably plays a little bit of a role in all that too.
I got two quick questions before we explain the rules, Pete. You've served in the Marines. Is there you don't have to talk about any of your picks right now, but just quickly, does that make the way that you look at certain war films different? Is there a sort of an affinity you have?
Yeah. In fact, I figured you were probably going to ask me about the Marine Corps. So
Yeah.
I wrote this little thing I want to read about the Marine Corps, just because I'm loyal to the loyal to the Corps. I've been out
Once a Marine, always a Marine. Right?
I mean, I think I've been out 30 years now, and so I want to read this. So each year, about 35,000, roughly 1 out of every 10,000 people in the United States enlists in the Marine Corps. This means about 0.01% of people join the Corps, or stated a different way, 99.99% of people do not join the Marine Corps. Of those who join, 20 to 30%, which is 7,000 to 11,000 of recruits, do not complete boot camp. The Marine Corps has approximately 175,000 active duty members. So Marines only make up 13.4% of the total active duty U.S. military force. Of the roughly 175,000 active duty Marines, only 15%, about 26,000 of them, are infantry Marines. All non-infantry military occupational specialties, in other words, the other approximately 85% in the Corps, exist to support the 26,000 infantrymen in their mission. Of the 26,000 infantry Marines, less than half of them are 0311 riflemen. I was an 0311 rifleman.
So you made it.
I
You
just
made
love
the cut.
that. I just love that. It's just so cool to me, I still see Marines for free for counseling. I'm a therapist, and if a Marine needs counseling, I see them for free for as long as they need it.
Awesome.
And that's kind of my way to be always faithful,
Yeah, that's awesome.
Else, yeah.
Beautiful. One last question before we jump in. How hard did you find it to put this list together? So you are doing your top 10, your honourable mentions. And the reason I'm asking was because we did Westerns in our last video, a couple of years ago, and I found that a lot easier. And I think the demarcation between a good Western that's a top 10 Western and one that's just not good enough to be in the top 10, it's very clear to me. Whereas war films, maybe it's because there's so many, that you actually have a lot more that sit in the middle that are not average, but they're not top 10 either.
Well, okay, first of all, you put Rango in your top 10 list of Western.
I did, mate.
Like, what dude?
And
Anyway,
I still love that. It's still right up there, bro. It is still right up there for me.
I mean,
it wasn't number one.
I have Rango in there. And anyway, okay. So I'm just waiting. He's got Toy Story 3 in the top 10 list.
Yeah, don't you worry about that, mate.
Oh, my gosh. But, so... okay.
Oh, brilliant.
What I would say though for my war movie list, it was not that hard for me to put this list together. What was tricky for me, I think, was what are the qualities of a good war movie?
Yeah.
And so, like they say, you do some dialogue with people who have different beliefs than you. You got to define the terms, right? Like, what's the measuring standard? So for my list, my measuring standard is the movies that I felt impacted me the most that had to do with war.
Yeah, that's great. That's
kind of right. Like, so I'm not talking about cinematography. I'm not going in like who's got the best cast or who made the most at the box office or what the critics said. Although there are a couple on here that they're, hailed by critics as very good. But it's just more about, the movies that affected me the most.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. I didn't, I really didn't. Like last time, I think I had like 20 something honorable mentions for Westerns, and I've only
Yeah.
got 9 honorable mentions for war movies.
Oh,
So
I've got more than that now, but for my honourables. But yeah, that's interesting. So yeah, maybe it was the other way around. Um, I'll explain the rules, folks, and then we'll start working our way through. We'll start from number 10, right on down to number 1. And what the rules were is these that I gave to Pete. Choose your top 10 war films. So what are you thinking are actually your top 10? Then any honourable mentions that don't qualify for the top 10, but, maybe it was a little bit hard to choose, or you definitely think they're right up there still. And then I said, choose a couple of war films, or however many you think really, that could also be enjoyed by a family who wants to watch a movie on Christmas Day. So you've had your Christmas meal and someone says, let's watch a movie. And you think, what's a classic film that a family could sit down and watch? So you're not going to be watching, some dark dystopian thing. You're not going to be watching Apocalypse Now, I'm guessing.
Watch Rango.
Or anything yeah. And my kids will ask for Rango, but no, we're not watching Rango, kids. But yeah, so that was the category. And then basically, the criteria said for that Christmas Day film is something that's not, it's not like an R-rated film that's just so full of violence. And because there is a place for those in war movies, I think. They're important films. I've often explained this to people with my young son. He's 12, but I think he was 9 when we sat down and watched Saving Private Ryan together. He was ready for it. His sisters weren't quite at that age, but he was. And he's seen a few more war films. Now, they're real stories. They're a bit graphic, but I'm comfortable with him watching a war film like that because I want him to understand the sacrifice and the horror of war. And, you have to see that. It's not... It's not gratuitous violence in that situation. So yeah, but they're not appropriate for sitting down and watching necessarily as a family movie together or anything. They're a bit bleaker. So, Pete, with those rules explained, let's jump in, shall we?
Okay.
And we'll start with our top 10. And do you want to start with your top 10?
Sure.
Number 10, working
I'll
to number
give you
1.
my number 10.
Yeah.
My number 10 is Dunkirk.
A new one.
Yeah, the new one. And I really liked the film.
Yeah.
And it might have been higher on my list, except that if you don't know the story, it never tells you what's going on.
Yeah, that's right.
It doesn't really. There's no dialogue or narration or anything that tells you why all this is happening. You just kind of have to know what happened at Dunkirk to understand.
Well, Pete, it's even more complex because it's non-linear storytelling. It jumps backwards and forwards in the timeline too.
Yeah. It's it kind of. This is going to sound weird, but it kind of reminded me of it's like a Catholic war movie because it's a meditation, really.
Yeah.
You just kind of watch it and you just kind of it's there's no real climactic things and the climaxes that are there are sort of subtle, and it just kind of leaves you going, wow, they pulled that off,
Yeah.
But there's no big celebration at the end, it's just, and you kind of have to put it together as you watch what's, you have to have a history, you have to know the history, you have to know what was going on, and, the Germans came in and there was no way for these troops to get out. And so all these people came, with their fishing boats and all kinds of stuff, to get them out. And the other thing I like about it is it doesn't, I've read some historical accounts of that, and I don't feel like the movie takes a whole lot of liberties with the history. It doesn't try to make it more amazing or less amazing, or it just kind of like they get the soldiers out of there, Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
I really
it's Christopher Nolan, phenomenal visual styles in that film too.
Yeah.
And I think that Roger Deakins might have been the cinematographer as well. His cinematography is amazing.
Oh yeah,
and
it's
very
like a meditation.
Yeah, it's really beautiful, isn't it, to watch that film?
Yeah.
Okay, so my number 10, actually, I cheated a little bit. I've got a number 11, and I really did. I was torn. My conscience.
You got to have a tie then. A tie. At
I know, and I'll tell you why. I was going to have a tie, but I couldn't figure out where to put this one. But it's definitely more than an honourable mention. So I thought, well, I'll just put it in 11, then jump straight into 10. I'll put it out there. I was so vexed by this because I didn't want to cheat at all. But my number 11, before we jump into number 10, is 13 Hours. It's about the secret soldiers of Benghazi. And I have a real affinity with that film. I read the biography before I watched the film, and I thought, oh, Michael Bay's making this film. He'll ruin it. It is easily the best Michael Bay film possibly that he's ever made, and it is faithful. It is absolutely faithful to those true events, and it's a really I was just blown away when I watched the film how faithful he was, and because I'd read the story, I had a real affinity with those men and what they went through, and so it was more than an honourable, but it's not. I couldn't figure out what else to dump off the list, so that was number 11. Number 10 though for me is Enemy at the Gates. Oh, and that tells loosely, because there's a lot we don't know thanks to Russian propaganda, of Yevgeny Zaitsev, the farmer who became a sniper, not deliberately. He just was a very good shot and became a phenomenal sniper who plagued the Germans, particularly the German invasion of Russia, the failed invasion, which cost a lot of lives. Like the Russians paid the greatest toll out of any nation for.
Well, they did, and
both military and civilian casualties.
They had the hardest fights too. Well, okay, I shouldn't say that, because I think that what the Marines did in the South Pacific was.
Oh yeah.
But I think as far as a nation, the Russians, played a role in winning that war that they don't ever get credit for, I don't think.
Yeah, and it's a film too that it touches on a theatre of war, and I think probably because of communism and the Cold War, you didn't get too many films about the Russian theatre of war because they were seen as the enemy, I guess, for so long. And so it's after the fall of communism that this film is made. And it's just a very good, I think the soundtrack is by James Horner. That really compels the film along as well. It's really well made, really well acted. And I'd never heard of it. I didn't know anything about the story going in. And I watched it and I was like, wow, this is a real sleeper hit. One of those films that, you used to have that came out of nowhere and you're like, man, this is amazing. And it's just, now, there's a lot we don't know because of the propaganda, and there's a lot of uncertainties and unknowns about what happened around some of that stuff. So they've filled in a few blanks. One thing I'll say, special mention, my younger brother who now lives in Canada, it was as a direct result of this film that he went, when he moved to Canada, bought himself his first Mosin Nagant rifle, Russian rifle, the same rifle that he was using.
7.62.54 by 5.4.
That's it. Yeah. So that's my number 10, Pete, and my cheating, my number 11 as well.
Okay. Well, my number 9 is a classic to me. I've watched it since I was a little kid. Sands of Iwo Jima.
Oh, good film.
With John Wayne. Yeah. So it's kind of funny because I got it on my notes. I got to look because I can't remember exactly. Yeah, it was made in 49, I think.
Yeah, black and white.
It's a really old film, yeah. And but when I went to infantry school in the Marine Corps, at School of Infantry in California, the first day of infantry school, you're all sitting on these bleachers while the commanding officer is talking to you, and he says something. He gives a speech to us all on day one, and he says, "Look, when you picture a Marine, do you picture somebody in a jet?" And everybody's like, "No." He goes, "Do you picture somebody, in an office?" "No." "Do you picture somebody on a boat?" "No." "What do you picture?" And this one guy raised his hand. He goes, "You picture a guy, running up a beach in the movie The Sands of Iwo Jima." And he's like, "Yes." He goes, "What's he carrying?" "A rifle." "What's on his back?" "A pack." It's just, so it's, the Duke was in it. He was very young, John Wayne, but it's one of my all-time favorites. So,
well, that's interesting. So that's your number 9. That didn't make it onto my list, and it's funny. It is sort of an honourable mention for me, but you're right. That is a great film. My number 9, though, funnily enough, is about Iwo Jima, but it's a more recent one, and it is Letters from Iwo Jima.
Oh,
what was his name now? Clint Eastwood. So it's the companion films that he made. The other one was a lot more well known, of course, which is Flags of Our Fathers, which is about the planting of the flag on the summit of Iwo Jima, and in particular the men and what they experienced. Like if you've heard Johnny Cash's Ballad of Ira Hayes, the story of Ira Hayes is in there, and it's a very well told film. But I preferred when Letters from Iwo Jima came out, because he made two films, and so one's the American side, and then Letters from Iwo Jima is the Japanese campaign. And I thought, how are you going to tell this story? Because the Japanese were quite brutal, and how do you tell it with any sort of sense of honour without sort of demonising them too much and all the rest of it? And he did it. He did it really well. And I think for me, it gave me an appreciation perhaps of aspects of that battle and respect for the enemy that perhaps I hadn't really understood before. And I just think I actually thought it was better. Of the two films, I thought that was better. It really was more of a war film than a drama. But also had a real heart to it. And I think it gave a sense of the fact that not every Japanese soldier was an absolute psycho. A lot of them were just ordinary men who wanted to go home as well.
Well, they're soldiers doing their job. I mean, I'll mention something I was going to say now. I'll mention it later. But yeah, they're just soldiers doing their job. And that's what it comes down to at the end of the day.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So my one's a more modern take on Iwo Jima. And for those who haven't seen the film, I'd highly recommend it. And what you get is the story where they start with an excavation, an archaeological dig in one of the caves, and they find letters from the Japanese soldiers, and then they go back in time and tell you their story. And what's interesting too in the film, it highlights this. It's a subplot, it's not a major aspect of it, but it's definitely there, is the fact that there was disagreement between the Japanese military leadership, and some were absolute diehard nationalists who, let's just go to war and suicide bombing and the whole works. And the others who were actually more moral men, who had a bit more honour to them and weren't as crazed about it all. And so, for example, when the Japanese surrender came, some of these men tried to mount a coup to unseat the emperor, basically, and say, well, no, we're just going to keep fighting to the death. And others were like, no, that's not the right thing to do. So you get that aspect of it as well. Great film, well made. Yeah, I can't recommend it enough. Great. So, Pete, number 8 for you.
All right, so number 8 for me is Good Morning Vietnam.
Classic, yeah.
Yeah. Aside from Robin Williams being a brilliant actor, I think it does a really good job of giving you a subplot of, Vietnam. And you got the turmoil that he's going through. You got the censorship that was going on. He's in love with somebody. The person he thinks he can trust is his enemy. It turns out to be an enemy of the truth. And then there's the bureaucracy that you get a little bit of a feel for. Take that bureaucracy and multiply it by about 1 billion. And that's what it's like to be in the military, and it doesn't have a happy ending, and it's unresolved, and I think that's the way things a lot of times are.
Yeah, it's quite amazing, that film, really, isn't it? Because in theory, it probably shouldn't work if you think about it. Robin Williams, who was really still more known as a comedian at that stage, and he is this comedian. He's a brash, sort of vocal, funny character. You're putting him in a film about really, what a lot of ways is, and probably still for a lot of people, is considered America's darkest war because of obviously the first big major loss, and then the way the troops were treated and the protesting, and it really divided America. But it actually does work, right? As a movie, it really does work well.
Yeah, well, a lot of war movies, there's a lot of duality in them. And I think, at least in my list, and I think that's the human condition, there's that scene in Good Morning Vietnam where they're playing the What a Wonderful World, but they're showing all the violence, And I think that's one of the realities that is almost impossible to come to terms with. I think it illustrates our broken condition really well,
Yeah.
But
that's a good
it's one of my favorites.
For me, my number 8, it's a classic. It's got the Duke in it as well. Daryl F. Zanuck's The Longest Day. And it is a long film. But for me, this is a film that is the first time I saw it years ago when I first got introduced to it. I was like, wow, I get it now. One of the things that's kind of famous for is, first of all, the number of extras in some of these shots is off the charts. And there's these long shots. They did, like, before anyone was even doing this. Forget about what you've seen at the opening of Goodfellas, right? But they had a helicopter fly over a beach with probably, I would say, over 1,000 extras easy. And they filmed an entire battle scene and they just rehearsed it and did it. There's no cuts or anything. There's several shots like that in the film. The cast is what it is. There's an interesting group of different characters, and in some ways, John Wayne might feel a little bit out of place in this, but it works. It just works. And it was just amazing, as I said, the scope and the breadth of what it was and what it showed you. A black and white film. The first time I saw it, I thought, I've got to get a copy of this, and I got myself a copy on DVD. And then when it came out on Blu-ray, I upgraded to Blu-ray and still have it in the collection. There's something about this film. There's something really special about this movie, I think.
No, it's great. It's on my honorable mention list. But it was made in '62, which is interesting. Just like you said, what they were able to pull off, with the filming of it, even, and I like it. Robert Mitchum's in it, and
that's right.
It's
a pretty big cast, like a big name. I mean, possibly one of the first big sort of tentpole movies where you had this massive, almost like a symphony of major stars who are playing roles in this film.
Yeah, it was good. All right.
Okay, so number 7 for you, Pete. Where are you at with that?
Number 7 is The Dirty Dozen.
Oh, I knew this was going to be on your list. Brilliant.
You knew it?
Brilliant. I knew.
I love that
I thought Benny's going to have that on that list. Yeah. It's not Rango. It's not Rango, mate.
No, it's not Rango. Anything but Rango. I mean, The Dirty Dozen, first of all, you have to mention that, Lee Marvin served.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
He served in the military, and the movie was made in '67, which when you watch it, it seems like a '70s movie, when you watch it.
It does, doesn't it? It's got that gritty, dark '70s thing going on. Yeah,
but it's a great cast, and I like the theme. So I don't know how to say it. Okay. There's these rapists and murderers and all these guys that are, and they take them to train them to do a mission. And it seems sort of far-fetched, but it's really not.
Yeah.
In most ways, I don't know how much different those 12 guys are from any given unit in the midst of that kind of a conflict. The moral and ethical lines get blurred really fast.
Yeah.
And so, and then there's some humor in it, and, and you kind of watching the movie and you're enjoying it. There's action, there's humor, you're kind of like, okay. And then you get towards the end and they're dumping gas and all these people to blow them up. Right.
Yeah.
And people are horrified. I mean, I remember reading about the history of this film, and people were horrified by that. And it's like, yeah, that's war. Like, what do you?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't know that ever actually specific situation happened, but it very easily could have.
Yeah.
Right. And so I don't know. I just really like it. You got Lee Marvin and Charles Bronson, and I remember watching it when I was really young with my dad, and I don't know. I don't know what else to say about it.
Yeah, it's got a special place in your heart. Look,
Yeah.
I honestly, this is another film that really, when you're right, it does feel like it came out of the 70s, probably even the mid to late 70s. There's a lot more cynicism around, because you got it. One of the characters is an actual rapist, and they don't shy away from telling you that that's what he was.
Yep.
And you think, in theory, even in the 60s, the late 60s, that really the audiences should have gone, ugh. But it takes this group of anti-heroes, and it actually, like, everyone looks at now at things that Tarantino makes and says, oh, he was able to do that. But really, he's just copying all of those guys that came before him. And this was one of the first, I think, that actually managed to do that. And it doesn't feel like what it really is, which is, well, in places maybe it does. It is a darker, grittier film, but it doesn't feel overall like that. It almost feels. I'm going to mention another movie in my honourable mentions, which I think has a similar sort of thing going on, but a much lighter tone. And but this one doesn't feel overly dark or oppressive, does it?
No, but you have to think about it. You gotta kind of stew on what's going on. And one of the themes that I pull out of that film, as I've, not when I was a little kid, but, as I got older, I was like, there's nothing pretty about what happens in war. And and sometimes people who aren't very pretty have to go do it. You know, um, it's just like that saying that some men are opposed to violence and they are protected by men who are not. Or the often misquoted. I think it was a George Orwell. Some people say that he said something about we're able to sleep at night because violent men stand ready to do harm on those who would harm us.
Oh,
But that's
yeah.
not what he said.
Yeah. Yeah.
He said he said civilized men or something about civilized men are always protected by men who or civilized men are able to eat and play or something like that because they're protected by men who are not or something like that. It's not quite the exact quote. And so it's kind of like, yeah. So there are a bunch of these really bad guys, but they had to go do really bad stuff. And a lot of times,
Yeah.
nice, dainty, civilized men aren't willing to go do really bad stuff.
No, that's the difference, right? Isn't it?
Yeah, but anyway, yeah.
For me, my number 7 is mine's a bit lighter than yours, but it is a classic, and that is The Great Escape.
Oh yeah, great film.
Yeah, I mean, it based on a true story, of course,
Yep.
and it is. I don't know. This film will always be. I don't know what it is. The Steve McQueen. There's these classic moments in this movie.
James Garner.
I remember it as the motorbike
James-
jump.
No, I was going to say James Garner and Richard Attenborough and.
Yeah, and what a cast, right? And everyone has their moments in it too. It's like it's filled with these sort of classic moments that you remember.
Yeah.
And it's there's a reason why this is a classic, and it's the story that it tells and the way it's told, and it still holds up. It still holds up, that movie.
Oh yeah,
You know?
great film. That I might talk about it later, so I won't say anything about that one. But
Yeah, all right, good.
it
So
shows up a
we're
little
now
later
down to
on my
numbers.
list.
Okay, that's good. That's interesting. I had a feeling it might appear somewhere on your list as well. What's your number 6 then, Pete?
The Battle of the Bulge. Have you seen that one?
I have. It's been a while. In fact, I think I've got it in my digital collection too. Actually, I got it on a sale on iTunes a couple of years ago.
It's
Wow.
really good film. I'm trying to remember. Let me look and see when it was made here. 1965. Henry Fonda was in it. The thing I really like, there's two things that I like about this film. One is it has a theme where small things can change big things, right? So
Yeah.
people don't realize that if the Germans would have got that fuel, things might have turned out a little differently, And it's just
heck
this
yeah.
little
Yeah.
weird echelon group of guys who were kind of, not really in the center of any of the action, who had to kind of get it figured out and stop it from happening. The other thing that I really like about it is my 6th grade teacher in elementary school was there at the Battle of the Bulge.
No way. At the Bulge. Wow.
Yep. He was in the Army. He was a comm guy, and he
Yeah.
served under Patton. We never knew that he was in World War II. We knew he was in the Army. He had all these stories about places he'd been. But I went and reconnected with him several years ago, and it was actually kind of fortuitous because it was right before he died. He ended up dying just a few months after I went and saw him. And we talked about, he was at the Battle of the Bulge and he served under Patton. He didn't like Patton. He thought Patton was a moron. But, who likes their commanding officer, right? But yeah, so again, I like it because little battles win big wars.
Yeah.
And that's the story of the Spartans, right?
Yeah.
Little battles win big wars. But anyway, I put it in there. It was one I got introduced to when I was pretty young, and it reminds me of my teacher too. So
That's a good choice, and there's I might talk about that a bit later on, but of course it was the paratroopers, wasn't it, who were dropped in there, who became known as the battered bastards of Bastogne, wasn't it? They were in that Ardennes forest, and they got stuck in there. So it's a pretty hellish theatre of war, that one too. in Europe.
Yeah, it was. And
What it
the
was.
tanks, the tanks too, the German technology far surpassed ours.
Yeah.
We were just lucky we could run them out of gas. I mean, that was, yeah.
For me, my number 6, this is where I started to get a little bit torn. It was kind of easy to figure out my top 3 really, but 4, 5, and 6 was it was a bit of a challenge. You're sort of getting into the business end of things, and you're like, I don't want that one to be lower, but I can't justify putting it higher and all that kind of stuff. For me, it is a film that just really resonates for a few reasons, but one in particular I'll talk about in a second. But it is Black Hawk Down. And Black Hawk Down obviously talks about a theatre of war at a time before America was constantly back at war again, really. It's sort of one of those moments in history where, Americans, as far as the public was concerned, weren't really engaged in much. And then all of a
They
sudden,
didn't know what was going on.
you have no one had any idea, right? And then they wake up one morning and you have got dead American fighting men who their bodies are being dragged through the streets of this country most people probably never heard of before in Mogadishu in Somalia. And it was just a real shock. And I remember reading the book about it and, excuse me, and I was just amazed. The book was phenomenally well written. And then when the film came out, I thought it did Ridley Scott, really phenomenal job. I think he set a template for a lot of modern war films after that as well, what came after that. But I think it told the film really well. And I think to me, it felt like it got the mix right. It didn't glamorize the violence, but then it also showed you the heroism of these men who were caught in this situation. Possibly Ridley Scott is a little bit light on some of the backstory. Like, there's definitely some decisions made by the American command that contributed to what happened subsequently that weren't good. They weren't wise decisions. Like the firing of the Tomahawk missiles they fired into a meeting of war leaders that actually then set the stage for Farah Aidid to actually take control and things like that. But it is a phenomenal film. The one thing that really resonates with me a lot is Shugart and Gordon, the two snipers who volunteered to go down and actually try and defend that helicopter. And it cost them their lives. And there was, for me, I don't know why, that moment really resonates with me, that they did this truly heroic thing. Real courageous thing against the odds, and it did cost them their lives, but they went in knowing, and they had to ask multiple times. I think it was 3 times they had to ask before the operations command would say, "Yeah, we'll let you go down." So
yeah, no, it's a good film. It's not on my list, but definitely a good film. And again, that going down and it costing their lives. Again, they're doing their job. I mean, that's what you do, and.
Amazing, eh?
Yeah.
What's your number 5, Pete?
Okay, I have a tie.
Oh, so do I, actually. So do I. Yeah.
I remember I had the first tie last time. You're like, you can't have a tie. And I said, well, I'm having a tie. And then later you brought up Rango. So I'm like, I can have a tie if you can have Rango on your list.
Oh, Rango. Beautiful.
Right. So number 5 is a tie between my 2 favorite submarine movies. And the first one is The Hunt for Red October, and the second one is the USS Indianapolis. So
that's an interesting. So they're your 2 favorite sub films.
Yeah. So
because it is. Excuse the pun. It is a sub genre, if you like, of war movies.
It is a sub
films, right?
Red October, that was made in '90, and the Cold War was over. But Clancy came up with he wrote this brilliant book, and then they made a movie that wasn't too bad, It followed the book pretty well. That book is great, but it's really hard to convey in a short amount of time in the film.
Yeah.
Some of the things that are in the book that are really pretty intense, but they did a good job, with the film. Of course, how do you go wrong with Sean Connery? I wish they wouldn't have had Alec Baldwin.
Yeah,
I can't stand him. But at that time, he wasn't too bad of a lunatic. So
no. Yeah, well, they've had they're up to number 5. They've had 5 different actors now play that character.
Yeah.
In those John Clancy novels. Harrison Ford did it. Alec Baldwin. The guy Jim Krasinski from The Office, Ben Affleck, and who else was it? There's someone else I can't think of. But anyway, so that this.
Well, Harrison would have been great. I mean, if it had Harrison across from Connery.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but it's a good film. I really enjoy it. I enjoyed the book. It's a movie I'll watch over again, occasionally. And then the USS Indianapolis. When I saw they made that film, I was really like I was a little conflicted because the story of the Indianapolis is pretty terrible.
Yeah.
And I don't, I just was like, how are they going to do this? Like, I mean, and they did all right, I
Yeah.
mean, it's a pretty good film. And I think it's a story that has to be told,
Mm.
um, for a lot of reasons that I don't want to go into unpacking all of it, but just you think about what the Indianapolis basically delivered the bomb, and then most of them died.
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and it's just kind of like there's not a whole lot of good that comes from any of this, you
No.
know. Um,
Yeah,
and
that's a good point. It really is one of the darkest chapters for everybody involved.
yeah,
Mm.
so anyway, that's my number five.
That's a good choice, and two sub films together. There's
Two
actually
sub
quite a few
films.
sub movies. In the end, I didn't put any sub. Well, I put one sub miniseries somewhere, but I in my honorables, but I didn't really. I sort of shied away from subs. But you're right; those are good films. For me, my number five is again. I got a tie as well. The two films are first of all, I've got The Thin Red Line.
Oh, good film.
Terrence, yeah, and Terrence Malick, Catholic filmmaker, phenomenal guy. He wanted to be a philosopher, not a filmmaker. He's a real artist. A lot of his films are, again, they're like reflections. He actually stopped making films for several years and then came back suddenly unannounced and hey, here's another film, and sort of carried on again. And phenomenal guy. But The Thin Red Line, just, yeah, it's a beautiful film. It's well told. I remember the first time I watched it, I didn't appreciate it, because it was sort of at a phase when there's all these war movies were starting to get made, and they were generally sort of very linear stories. They were very chronological. They weren't artistic. They were just telling stories, and there was action. There was a drama aspect to it. This one is a bit more of a reflection and a meditation, and Terrence Malick makes films like that. And so the first time I watched it, I was like, oh, don't really like this. But then when I went back to it as an older man, I fell in love with this film. Just the art of it, the depth of what's going on, and it just really captures, I think, in a real beautiful way, the sense of the men and their own interior life in a war. It's just, and it does it without getting bleak either. It seems dark in places, but it's not bleak, I don't think. And
Yeah,
I
I
just
agree
there's
with that.
something about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good assessment.
The tie that I have, again, this is where this was so tough, is We Were Soldiers,
Oh,
based
yeah,
on the book that was written, We Were Soldiers Once and Young,
Once and
by
Young.
Joseph Gray
Yep.
and Lieutenant Colonel Helmore. He's dead now, but is he 3-star general? They gave him a posthumous. But he's got a fort named after him. Actually, this year they named a fort after him early this year. But what I love about this, there's so much I love about We Were Soldiers. First of all, I think it's one of the Vietnam films that actually manages to tell the tale and the story. It's a true story about the men who got dropped into the Nha Trang Valley, and they're totally outnumbered, bad intelligence, but they were some of the first men in, so they were still professional soldiers. I've got two uncles who served voluntarily in New Zealand. We didn't have conscription, but they served voluntarily in Vietnam. My own father tried to go, but because of a medical issue, they wouldn't let him. And so his twin brother, though, did serve, and another one of my uncles. And they always talked about, I remember them when I was a young kid, they would say, look, by the end of the war with the conscripts who didn't want to be there, the amount of officer killings that were happening by soldiers and the drugs, because it was just pretty bleak.
Yeah.
They sort of said that basically the Australian and New Zealand soldiers knew to sort of stay away from some of those American soldiers because they just didn't want to be there. They weren't professional soldiers. These guys in this film are the soldiers who went in there, the first up guys, and they were professional soldiers. They were men of great character and skill. And Lieutenant Colonel Helmore, who was at the time, it was phenomenal that he managed to actually hold off the enemy under those circumstances. It really is something else.
No, that's on my honorable mentions, and
Yeah.
it's actually number 11 of my honor. So it's
Yeah,
close to my top
yeah.
10. But the Nha Trang
Yeah.
Valley was a really big deal, and the was it Moore? I think, yeah, right.
Yeah, Helmore. Yeah.
Moore, yeah. he was saying like he was pretty critical of Vietnam era movies,
Yeah.
and so when that was made, there are some historical inaccuracies in it,
Yeah.
but overall it does a pretty good job of giving you a snapshot of that battle in that valley, very early in the Vietnam War. I mean,
Yeah, and what I think is great too is that you're right. The book, when you read the book, Joseph Gray was the journalist who wrote the book with him. The book, you realize, oh, this actually took place over longer. There's a lot more involved, and
Yeah.
you learn things about how. Like one of my favorite quotes from Hal Moore, and this is, I've adopted this as a leadership quote myself. Is his famous line was, "There's always one more thing you can do." And that, for me, that's a great leadership principle. And he sat down and he thought, okay, we're in this awful situation. If I was my own enemy, if I was the Viet Cong, what would I do to try and, overwhelm me? And then he just moved what little resources he had. He kept moving. He said, right, I think I'd go to the creek bed. I'll move my machine gun units to the creek bed. Things like that. And then he goes, right, I've moved them here. And he just always anticipated. Phenomenal leader, humble man, Catholic, father, faithful, had a faith life as well. And what I liked about this film in particular is I think this is one of the first films that actually tells the story of the fighting men as fighting for the man alongside them.
right.
And it started a trend that wasn't really there in films, and it did it in a war that was very unpopular, and that was Vietnam. And he actually did it. That film tells the story of these men and treats them not as baby killers and, all the previous films we've seen that tell the atrocities that happened. This one actually focused on men who were men of character and who were heroic in this awful situation and who fought for the man alongside them.
Yeah. Yeah. I never served in combat, but I have friends who did, and they talk a lot about that the cause we're here fighting for kind of goes out of your mind, and it just becomes more about the guy next to you,
Yeah.
So,
And this film got that right.
yeah, they did.
Well,
Yeah,
Pete,
Mel
before
Gibson did a great job in it too, I thought,
Oh yeah, Gibson was great. And who was it? What's his name? Who was the sergeant major? He's been in a couple of westerns as well. Gosh, I can see his Sam. What's his name?
Oh, Elliot.
Sam Elliott. Yeah. He was really great in that film.
Yeah.
And the way here's a character arc with his one particular character. He's just a real mean, grumpy sergeant major, and this guy says good morning to him, and he says, how do you know it's an effing good morning back? He just and keeps on walking. And that same character at the end, he says to him, today's a good day when they've survived this awful hellish battle, and he shows respect to this sort of subordinate who's really acquitted himself with courage. It's a lot to like about that film. Pete, before we jump into your number 4, just don't forget, folks, if you haven't subscribed, if you haven't clicked like, do that with the video, and don't forget to share it with your friends and family. That all really helps the channel. We also have a Patreon channel, patreon.com/leftfootmedia, and you can support us that way if you want to. Pete, what's your number 4?
All right, we're getting down to the nitty gritty here.
We are, indeed.
Number 4, I'll give you a hint. Fighting soldiers from the sky. The Green Berets, baby.
Oh, I'm just spitting out my water as I'm thinking about that. Sorry. Look, I've got a wet shirt now and everything. That's hilarious. Well, I mean, of course, how did I know? I mean, I'm surprised you just didn't go Google John Wayne war films,
Yeah. No, the Green Berets is a great film, and I have a lot of reasons I like this film, but just real quick, one, they tell a story with, by bringing in the reporter, who's kind of anti, and they kind of go back and forth. I think there's some propaganda obviously in the film. I mean, at the time it was made and everything else, but it's a great film. John Wayne, Green Berets. Now, I don't know what else to say about it. I love it. I love the song, The Ballad of the Green Berets. I used to listen to that as a kid. I thought I wanted to be a Green Beret, but then I learned about the Marine Corps, and then that was it. I was going to be a Marine. But here's a little side note, right? Like, why do these movies affect me? Well, my very first martial arts instructor was a Green Beret in Vietnam.
Ah, wow. Okay.
And he just died a few months ago at the age of 83, I think. But when you post this, I will put in the comments a link to an interview with him. If anybody wants to watch an interview with a guy who was a Green Beret in Vietnam and was smart, like Green Berets aren't stupid. They're not like 0311 Marines who run up the hill and catch bullets.
Jarheads. They're not jarheads.
Yeah. I mean, they speak multiple languages. They're trained in psychological warfare, indoctrination.
Well, Pete, I don't know about you, Pete, but when I was a kid, the Green Berets were the only special forces that we knew about, apart from SAS.
Yeah, you don't hear about much else, right? I mean, but see, it's about an hour and 20-minute or so interview with him in the Library of Congress. It's saved, and he talks about what he did there. He talks about politically what was happening and how the decisions here were affecting them in Vietnam. It's a really good interview. So I'll put a link, to it in the comments of this so people can watch it. His name was, and get a load of his name. His name was Bruce Wayne Pope.
Oh, no.
So he's named after Batman, right? I mean,
this guy was ticking all the boxes.
He was bulletproof, man, and he was, he was a huge influence on me as a kid. The things he taught me, the nickname he gave me stayed with me for almost my whole life. I mean, he's just, but I loved the Green Berets, and my mom and I used to watch it together. It's the only war film that my mom and I watched together, other than one other one. So there were two war films my mom and I watched together, and the Green Berets was one of them. Whenever it came on TBS, my mom would hear the song, and she'd come up. Are you watching the Green Berets? Hey, let's watch. Anyway, so that's my number 4.
I was watching an interview actually recently. Ex-Special Forces guy's got a great podcast, and he brings on other spec op guys, and they just tell their stories. And I heard them both. They were talking about this, and they said that film was a really, really big coup for the Green Berets actually in recruitment. A lot of people young men in particular, were really sort of taken by that and the thought of being, special forces and the Green Berets. So you can see why it became such a thing, And now we talk about all the other various branches and divisions of the special forces, but at the time, SAS and Green Berets, they were the ones that everyone knew. Certainly when I was a kid anyway. That's a good choice. Good choice. My number 4 is a modern film, but a phenomenal.
Toy Story 3?
No, Toy Story 1, actually. No, it's it's Rango. No, it's not Rango. It is a phenomenal film. Really unexpected too, I'd have to say, considering this was released as a Netflix movie, and that is All Quiet on the Western Front.
Oh, great film.
I mean, it's just phenomenal. Like, there are very few modern war films now that come out that I think that really, there was like a renaissance we went through about 20, 30 years ago. And then there was a sort of a big glut more recently. Well, this one came out. It was a Netflix movie. You think, is this going to be any good? It was amazing. It's obviously a retelling of the original novel, and there's an older version of the film too. But this one, man, it just puts you into the hellish theatre that was World War I, and it puts you into that theatre on the side of the Germans, particularly the young men, and the way that young man goes from this idealistic, let's go on an adventure, to by the end, he's just this jaded, very cynical man, and the futility of that final little push after the surrender, but before the official cut-off, was just, man, but that is such a well-made movie. And
I like the original one too a lot.
Original's great. Yeah, the original is great, and it touches on different themes from the novel. But this, honestly, for a modern remake of an older film and a book and a modern war movie that came out straight onto Netflix, you're like, man, you can see why it gets nominated for Academy Awards. It's just
good film. Yeah,
great.
It's on my honorable mentions.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, both of them. They're kind of a tie, the old one and the new one. They're both, I like them both.
Awesome.
You know what? It kind of reminds me of the theme when you see films about Gallipoli.
Yeah.
I mean, same war, right? But that idea of like, what are we doing? This is
well,
just
it was so, and it was just, the futility. Like, you really get an appreciation in this film. There's one or two others like that as well, that like, I don't think we take it for granted now, but this was the first time these men had ever engaged in modern mechanized industrial warfare. Like, it's shelling, it's tanks for the first time, it's gas, which is now obviously a war crime, but it wasn't then.
I was going to say the gas. Yeah.
I mean, there's a whole story. Like, I have one of my he's my great grandfather on my grandmother's side. He's a McDermott, and he actually fought in that war, and he got a little bit of gas, so he used to cough at night. And my great grandfather, he was actually was supposed to be nominated amongst a group of men for a Victoria Cross, but the British said, no, we're not giving it too many of these things away. And so one guy in the action, they were laying telephone lines all afternoon under fire, when you had to actually run the lines with a cable wheel on your back. And there was a group of 5 of them involved, and my great-grandfather was one of the 5 nominated, and the British said no, so they gave it to the guy who, and right, so he deserved it, but the others, they're named but didn't get the thing. Anyway, so it was a hellish war, and you go from like maybe cavalry with rifles to now mechanized. And like, you can see why Tolkien got a lot of his ideas for Mordor and the darkness of Sauron in that place, the barbarism and sort of ruined landscape. And just when we said we take that for granted now, they have tanks, they have shells, all that. They didn't have that before that,
Yeah, no, it's a really good film, and I agree.
Right, Pete, moving on. Number 3, we're really into the business end of the season now. So what's your number 3?
Saving Private Ryan.
Oh, good choice.
Yeah,
very good choice.
It's an army film, I mean, army, I guess we need them. But I again, even just for the opening scene, I think, and then, it's not a happy movie,
No.
I mean, it's pretty dark. And, the opening scene, the movement through France, the sniper who's a Christian,
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, it's just a tough movie to watch, really.
Yeah.
And so it's not a number 1 for me. But I don't know what else to say. I mean, if you don't have at least one movie that has to deal with those landings on your top 10 list, there's a problem,
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, it's a tough movie to watch, but it's very good. I think it was very well done. And I think it captures a lot of the garbage that, and the I don't know how to say it, the awfulness of war. We won D-Day, look at but man, can you imagine being 18 on one of those PT boats?
Be awful, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah, some of them didn't even make it onto the shore.
Many didn't.
Yeah, you go over the side because they're being shot at and they drown. Things like that.
Yeah, and there's not. See, the thing is too, there's not a really good South Pacific Marine. I mean, Sans of Iwo Jima is all right. It's on my list, right? But when you talk about like battles in the South Pacific, like at Tarawa, where the PT boats were hitting coral reefs. Yeah. So the guys had to jump out and come in just in the water on their own, and then the sharks show up. So there's sharks tearing guys up, these Marines, and they're trying to get to the shore to fight. It's crazy. One of the stories that I read about the guys who find mines, the engineers, they were getting shot as they were crawling in, trying to mark a safe path. And then they'd get shot and they were dying. They would stick their marker stake into themselves so it would stay up, so the guys coming after them would know the path to go, even though they were dead, And when I see some guy at the store now with purple hair, and asking for the gluten-free vegan option, I just go, man, what would we do? What would we do if we had to do that again? We just, I don't know, man. Like, those were tough men. Those were very tough men.
Well, there's no gluten-free marker steak that you're putting into yourself, is there?
Yeah, but yeah. So I wish there would have been a really good film made about the brutality of those South Pacific landings. There just hasn't been.
I'll tell you, when we get to honourable mentions, I'll mention something that I think you're right. It doesn't tell the whole story, but sort of touches on that.
Yeah.
You're right about Saving Private Ryan. I think for me, the two things about it are it's quite amazing when you realise that they've actually told a fictional tale. Now, normally when you get those kind of movies, they don't quite work as well. Your brain goes, yeah, I know this is a made-up story, and it feels at times a little bit exploitative too. You think, oh, they've used a real theatre of war and then they've just put a fictional tale. This one doesn't. It shows respect. It pays homage to the men, and it actually gives you a sense for the real sacrifice of real people, even though it's putting a fictional tale into real events. And there's very, very few movies who could actually do that, and it did it. It really did. I know, for example, too, that that opening scene, they showed veterans. They gave them special screenings, and some of them actually left. They had to go out and come back in again because it put them into sort of almost like shell shock. It was that real.
PTSD. I have a friend whose grandpa served in World War II, and he went to the theater and he had to walk out and then come back in.
Yeah,
because he goes, that's exactly what it was. He goes, that exactly was So
and I think that's the other.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's what that for me, the other thing about that film is it really it gave a brand new visual look and style to war movies, particularly World War II movies, that everyone else started copying after that. So we sort of forget that now. We watch a film and they have like the bullet hitting the sand, and you have bits of sand and dirt and smoke across the frame and all that. People forget that wasn't how war films used to look. They looked very clean. And so you got all of that grit and the sort of desaturated color tones with lots of greens and grays and browns in them. That was not how those films looked, and everyone copied it after that because I don't know why it worked, but it does. It puts you in a sense of getting an appreciation for that going back in time. It's very, in theory, it shouldn't work, but it does, and it obviously it was so effective that everyone started copying Saving Private Ryan after that and those techniques. For me, my number 3 is a classic, and I absolutely rate this film. It is a phenomenal film, a true story that tells the story of T.E. Lawrence, and that is Lawrence of Arabia. And it is a long film, 3 hours and 40 minutes. If you haven't seen the remastered version, you should. I know some purists are probably going, oh, no, watch the original one. No, the remastered is great. You don't need to watch the original and all of its grainy old school film footage to get an appreciation. The remaster is phenomenal, and it doesn't interfere with the story or anything like that. And what it's important. I watched this over the weekend. I had the opportunity, very rare opportunity, to sit down in 2 parts with my children, my youngest kids in particular, started watching it with me. They couldn't stop watching, and they're young. My 9-year-old daughter hung in for the whole thing, and so it's a great film. And it's important because it's about what's going on around, the same area, Syria, which has just fallen into chaos in the last few days. And it's the same issue. Like they're trying to take Damascus, and it's set during World War I. And it's this, the realization at the end of the film, of course, is that Lawrence has, is that the Arabs are tribal people. They have a different way of doing things. And these Western proxy wars and attempts to sort of control that region for their own interests, it's just a disaster, and it's never going to actually bring about lasting peace. And that theme, it's so prophetic, and it was purely by chance. I happened to be watching it over the weekend. I didn't intentionally do this. And then when Syria falls again, and you realize, oh yeah, that's exactly the same region and the same themes. But it is a phenomenal film. It is so watchable now. It really, movies of that age tend to be, they don't age so well normally. This one does. There were some techniques in it that were copied by others subsequently, but it tells, like, it's the opening is him getting on his motorbike back in England, and he died in 1935 in a bike accident, and then it goes back and tells you why he was so highly respected. And the pacing is very good. It's just, and I also have to say, they did things that you wouldn't get away with now. So there's a young Omar Sharif in it, playing an Arabic character, but they had Alec Guinness playing Prince Faisal. And there's a bit of darkening of his skin, and you would not have that happening now. There's no way that would be acceptable. I'm surprised this film has not been cancelled as a result of that. But amazing film. Peter O'Toole plays Lawrence. It's just really, really good film.
Yeah, he's a great actor anyway. But I was laughing when you said it's a really long film. And then you said the remastered version's better because I agree. But I think I read somewhere in one of the papal encyclicals that if you watch the old version of Lawrence of Arabia that's not remastered and follow it right up with the Ten Commandments, that you don't have to go to purgatory.
Oh, that'd be about
You
right,
can't take
mate.
any breaks. You can't take any breaks.
No. And you add Ben Hur into the mix and you'd probably get about 10 people into heaven with you. It's yeah, gosh, that's good. Right, we're now really at the sharp end. We're at the point of the spear now, mate, to borrow a military term. So what's your number 2?
My number 2 is The Great Escape.
Oh, yeah, good. You put it high. I knew it was going to be on your list somewhere.
Yeah, I saw it when I was pretty young originally, and I really liked it, but I didn't really appreciate what was going on. I mean, to me, it was just kind of entertainment.
Yeah.
And I was probably 5 or 6 the first time I saw it. And then when I was about 10 or 11, I saw it again. I want to say 11. And my mom and I watched it one night. This is the other one that my mom and I used to watch. We were eating popcorn. And for the first, I'd seen it a couple times, I think, since then, but just, this is the motorcycle guy. And, but that night I remember I paid attention at the end because you miss subtleties. You don't, and they're talking about where these other men are. And I'm like, well, where are they, Mom? What's going on? And she goes, they killed them.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, like it didn't, for whatever reason, and then at the end when, this picture is dedicated to the 50. Yeah. If you remember, that's the line that they show at the end. Is this picture is dedicated to the 50. And it took a whole different, path for me. And again, it goes back to one of the themes that really strikes me in war movies, especially, and that I've mentioned a couple of times early on, was you follow orders, you do your job. And, these men knew that by continuing to try to escape, it was very likely they were going to get killed, either in the attempt, during the attempt, and they said, well, that's our job. That's our sworn duty,
Yeah.
And I remember when I went in the Marine Corps and we were in boot camp and they talk about that. That's one of the code of conduct is that if you're captured, you're supposed to make every effort to escape. And if you can't escape, you're supposed to make the enemy use as many resources as possible trying to keep you from escaping.
Yeah.
And in the Marine Corps, they tell you never surrender. They don't say you surrender when you can't fight anymore. You say you don't ever surrender. You don't surrender. So it's just
like Rango. It's never on the menu for you, mate.
yeah. So, but but just as a film, I think it's a great film. It could be a Christmas film. I think it's not one of my Christmas films, but it could be. And the acting's great. I mean, the cast is fantastic. I don't know. I mean, it's almost my favorite.
Wow, that's high praise. I get it though. It's a great film, and I mean Steve McQueen, and it just works, right? It just
Captain Hiltz. Remember that?
That's right. And that baseball mitten, he had. Yeah, oh gosh, it was just phenomenal, wasn't it? So that's a good choice. So my number 2 was actually a split decision. It was a tie, and I feel a little bit like I'm cheating here, but I just couldn't not put this in. So Saving Private Ryan was one.
Okay.
And we've already talked about that, but it is equal for me with Band of Brothers. I sort of see them as one big story. And Band of Brothers, it's cheating a little bit because it's a TV miniseries, not a movie, but I view it as one long film story. And it is, it's one of the best pieces of television ever made. Phenomenal account of the lives of those men. There were actually a couple of mistakes. There was one mistake in particular. For those who have seen Band of Brothers, there's one character they come across at one stage. I think it's in the 3rd episode, just after the landings, and they're all scattered and they're forming up units of whoever they can find. And there's a young guy who's like shell-shocked. And they have him, because in the original book that Ambrose wrote, he thought, according to the historical record, this guy had been shot and killed. And his family came forward and they said, when they saw the band of brothers, and they said, no, he's alive. He survived the war. But that Ambrose thought he died because the historical record seemed to indicate that. But in actual fact, they just sort of lost track of him. So, but it's it's a great story, and it particularly the story it tells about those men, and I think Winters in particular, just a phenomenal leader of men. And there's something about that film that it just, there's almost the complete story there. These special forces, the heroism of what they did, the war that they were engaged in. It was a just struggle against an unjust enemy. And also the leadership of Winters, a very virtuous and a man full of character who really did lead from the front. And absolutely amazing. So I mean, Band of Brothers for me, it's just, it's right up there. And as I said, I see it as a continuation because Saving Private Ryan really, I think, gave HBO and the other studios a sense, oh, wow, Spielberg and Tom Hanks together, this is a good combo. And that really did pave the way, I think. I'm not sure whether Band of Brothers would have actually been made without Saving Private Ryan. I'm not sure.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point.
So, that's my number 2, those two. And I sort of view them together alongside. Right, we're in the real challenging end of things now, Pete. Number 1.
It's easy. Number 1's easy for me.
All right, let's hear it. Rango.
No, not Rango. So number 1 for me is Full Metal Jacket.
Ah, interesting. So you went dark. You went dark. Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. Good.
And
good.
let me tell you why. So,
can I ask before you say that? Was there any internal conflict? Did you have like Apocalypse Now competing with it or anything like that? Because they're in that sort of similar vein. No. Okay.
No. See, Full Metal Jacket. Okay. First of all, it's about Marines. So.
Yeah.
It had number 1 had to be a Marine movie.
Yeah.
And Lee Ermey is in it, and he was a Marine drill instructor at one time as well. But
he came here to New Zealand to star in The Frighteners by Peter Jackson, just down the road from us. That was filmed.
Oh,
and he's
cool.
the sergeant major. He pops out of the grave with the 2 machine guns, one on each arm at one point.
Oh,
as
that's
a ghost.
right. Yeah. Okay. But the movie, it shows boot camp. And I think they do a really good job there with boot camp. And then, it does a pretty good job, I think, based on people who I know were in the Marine Corps in Vietnam, sort of giving you a feel for what that was like, especially a little bit later. I don't know how well it matches up culturally with the time because the battle for Hue City was terrible. It was just terrible. I mean, it was a horrible fighting conditions. And the Marine Corps hasn't had to face anything quite like that until Fallujah.
Yeah.
And in Fallujah, I don't know how much you know about, but they had to wait until finally they were allowed to go in. But the Marine Corps had to go in and clear that entire city house by house.
Yeah, it's house to house, right? It's just awful.
Yeah, and that was the battle for Hue as well. And now, so I saw Full Metal Jacket when it came out, obviously in the 80s, and then I went in the Marine Corps, and all of us could quote that movie front, back, and forward. It's a Marine movie and everything. But there's a whole nother side to this too that makes that movie really kind of cool for me because, like I said, the battle for Hue and the battle for Fallujah were very sort of similar in content, I guess. It's house to house. These Marines going house to house. Now, there is a very famous Marine who retired. I can't remember what year he retired, but he retired as a sergeant major. And it's Sergeant Major Brad Castle. Some people pronounce it Casal. There's a really famous picture of him, and there's a book about him, and I've got it right here. So this is the thing. have you seen that picture before?
Wow. Yeah.
He's the
Amazing.
one in the middle.
Yeah.
He's right here, and he went. He had some of his. He was a first sergeant in that picture, and some of his men were pinned down in this house in Fallujah. And what was going on was there was this. They don't know what the inside of these houses look like when they go in. They just go in. These are just young men, 18, 19, 20. Infantry 0311 Marines, backed up by some. There's some Army tanks around, and then there's some LAVs and different tow missiles and stuff. But really, it's just you're going in with your rifle trying to clear these houses out. And they all know you're coming because all the citizens that didn't want any part of this had plenty of time to leave the city. So anyone who's left is a an enemy combatant, and they're waiting for you. It's the worst possible situation is to go into urban warfare when people are waiting for you and know you're coming. And you don't know what it looks like when you get in there, right?
Yeah.
So some of his guys got into this house and got pinned down because it had this open central area where if you were on the second or third floor of this house, you could just look down onto the kind of like what would be the living room or whatever, and you could shoot down. You had the high ground.
Yeah.
And they got
fish in a
pinned
barrel.
down. Yeah, they got pinned down in there. And when he found out his men were pinned down, now the other thing about Sergeant Castle, you have to understand, Sergeant Major Castle, is he went into the Marine Corps and went into the infantry, and he retired from the infantry. The only time he wasn't in the infantry was when he was a recruiter for a couple years.
Yeah.
So most guys go in and they do the infantry for 4 or 5 years, and then they go to something else. It's a young man's game, But he never left the infantry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Stayed.
So he goes in, he grabs a couple guys and goes into this house, goes storming into this house to get his men out. And he gets trapped in this part of this house, and he takes 7 rounds.
Yeah.
Okay, from an AK-47, and then he jumps on his buddy to protect him from a grenade. So he had 46 fragments of steel in him. He lost 60% of his blood, and he wouldn't let. They got everybody. They got out of there, but he wouldn't let anybody treat him medically until all of his men were treated first. He's a first sergeant, so until my privates are treated, my lance corporals are treated, right? So he earned the nickname the T-1000, and I know a guy who served with him in Fallujah. He's like, I remember that hell house, and they didn't know how they were going to get everybody out of there until First Sergeant Castle became the T-1000 and ran in there and got everything started to get him out. Now, really cool story. You can read about it in this book. It's called My Men Are My Heroes. But when you read this book, final, Paul Harvey moment. I don't know if you know who Paul Harvey was. You say the rest of the story, right? There's a part in this book where it talks about when Sergeant Major Castle was an instructor, a platoon sergeant at the School of Infantry, Charlie Company.
Yeah.
He was my platoon sergeant.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
when I went
you're direct connected to him.
Yeah, when I went to School of Infantry, Charlie Company in 1993, he was my platoon sergeant. And just about a couple months ago, just a couple months ago, I was able to reconnect with him, and we were able to talk on the phone for about 20, 25 minutes. And it was great. It was a great conversation. And he's the one that gave me that little breakdown of the Marine Corps.
Yeah, awesome.
That I read at the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
we have to credit him now then.
Yeah. Well, the battle for Way, tied to the battle for Fallujah is part of it. But Full Metal Jacket, I just feel like I agree when they say critics have acclaimed it as the greatest war movie ever made. And I really do. It's not happy. It's very dark, but it's my number one. There, I'm done.
Wow, yeah, that's an interesting choice. I mean, I had a feeling that might be on your list somewhere, but I didn't realize it'd be number one. So that's quite interesting. I thought, I bet he's going to have Full Metal Jacket. I didn't put it anywhere, either top 10 or honourables. I get it, but for me, I just, some films you don't connect with, and they just feel a little bit the darkness of them. For me, it just, I totally understand why it is a a highly rated movie, though. It is an amazing piece of
Well,
theatrical
and
art. There's no
and
doubt
I'll
in
add
that.
one thing. I'll add one thing.
Mm.
I've watched that film many times over the years. I haven't watched it lately,
Mm.
but I've watched it with a lot of different people. And when people watch it and laugh, I know
Yeah.
they don't get it.
Yeah,
They don't get
yeah, yeah. That's a good point.
it, right? When
Yeah,
people watch it and go, "Oh, like
yeah.
wow, okay," like then I'm like, "Okay, you get it. You get the film, right?" Like,
It's not. It's because it's not. It's not like Doctor Strangelove. The those moments are actually there to show you really the horror and the darkness of it all, right? They're not. It's not there for you to go, "Oh, this is a parody." It's not a parody movie.
yeah.
You know.
Well, and even the
Yeah.
boot camp sequence that it starts with, right, which is a
Yeah.
good 45 minutes, I think, of the
Yeah, it is a
movie.
big chunk of it, right?
People laugh, ha ha ha, and it's like, well, that's not really supposed to be funny.
No.
The Marine Corps is still the only branch that follows the break them all the way down before you build them
Yeah.
back up mentality, and
Yeah.
they still do. There's things changing in the Corps that I'm not really happy to hear about, but and there's a reason that they do that because it works, generally speaking.
Yeah.
But it's not supposed to be funny.
No.
There's nothing. But there's times there's moments in boot camp where you're kind of like stuff happens, but and you live for those moments because but it's not supposed to be funny, right? So when people watch it and laugh, it's like, man, you don't get it. You don't get the
No.
movie at all.
No, and it's the breaking down, even the way that's portrayed, right? Of these men who are, it's raising a moral question without even doing that. Is it appropriate or right to break a man's psychology in this way so you can use him in a war? And it's a valid moral question, but it doesn't.
It
does
is.
not. It's not a cheap film. It doesn't say I'm now going to preach at you. It just shows you stuff, and then it leaves you to draw your own conclusions.
Well, and it's the age old question, right? And I always say I've been asked about it as a Catholic, like, do you think it's ethical or not? And I said, I don't know. But here's the thing: until there's a better way,
Yeah,
some people have to go do that job,
yeah,
and you can't send people to do that job that can't handle the stress and the horror of doing that job. So.
Yeah.
How else do you get them there?
Yeah, it is what it is, right? It's soldiering, right? It's yeah.
So-
My number one is, and it's funny, I never ever thought this film has really grown on me over the years in a big way. And I the first time I saw it, I fell in love with the film, which sounds strange when I tell you what it is, but it really grew on me over the years, and it's a film that I'll watch at least once a year and easily can keep going back to, and that is the movie Downfall, and it's the final days of Hitler in the bunker. And so, as I said, when I say you fall in love with a movie like that, how can you fall in that? But it is. I mean, there's so much going on here. The film is amazing. The way it's put together is amazing. The cinematography and everything is phenomenal. It's a very good film. It's about a part of the war where things are not quite as well known. You generally don't get films. There were documentaries, but not films about the final days in the bunker. And then also the fact that it manages to convey that there were some moral men even amongst this awful regime. And there were men there who probably had made immoral decisions, but then at the end were trying to actually do the right thing by doctoring people and others, even though they'd been part of this bad regime. It walks that line very well. One of the complaints that a lot of people had when it came out, so it's a German film. Bruno Ganz played Hitler, and he became the model. I think after that, everyone said, "Wow, that's what Hitler should look like in a film or a documentary or a TV show." They really went back to that. But Bruno Ganz really got, I think. It's almost like you're watching more Hitler version of Hitler. I think the one complaint that actually happened at the time, the director was criticised by people. They said, this has humanised Hitler far too much. And he said, that's the point. He said, if you think Hitler is this sort of diabolical monster with horns and red eyes, you won't recognise the danger when it comes again, because you'll be looking for the wrong thing. And he said, I wanted to show you that this monstrous ideology, this is Hannah Arendt, who talked about the banality of evil when she saw Adolf Eichmann on trial in Israel, and she expected to see a monster and she just saw an ordinary looking man. She's like, wow, this is very banal and boring, but it's diabolically monstrous. And that's what this film does. You sort of, into the despair, the darkness of that regime, the collapse. What's his name? Goebbels and his wife Magda, who they poisoned all of their children bar one or two of them. I think one of them was away fighting, and you know, he comes back. His parents, who were the propaganda arm of the regime, they're both suicided, and your siblings have been killed. They've been poisoned in their sleep by your parents, and it's just, it's not great subject matter, but it tells the story, I think, in a way that it's an important story. And it tells it in a way, the Nazis are definitely not glorified, but they're not one-dimensional cartoon villains either. And it really invites you to think about how such a regime could actually happen, and how such an evil and a madness could sort of overcome people. The one thing that is there's a bit of a problem in it, and that is it presents Speer, who was Hitler's architect. It actually paints him probably in a little bit too favourable light. After the war, Speer, he was one of the few guys in the inner circle who didn't get executed and was actually able to do a very short prison sentence and then carry on with his life. And part of it was because he told stories. He claimed he was involved in an assassination attempt that failed, and he thought about putting gas into the bunker. There's some really serious questions now about whether that really is true or not. And so he may not have been the way he presented himself fully. And so this film, that scholarship hadn't really come forward. So Albert Speer is probably painted in a little bit more of a sympathetic light than maybe is accurate. But aside from that, it's a film that just, I don't know. It in theory, it's a film that you should go, I wouldn't want to watch this ever again. But it tells the human story and the moral question and the moral story in such a compelling way that you can, I think, revisit it. And it's very rare for a film of that type, that's for sure. Yeah. So, Downfall, very phenomenal film. Cool. There's a really important bit, too, at the end of that movie where, because they based it on the memoirs of Trudel Junge, she worked for Hitler as one of his secretaries. And they obviously filmed interview footage with her before they made the film to use as reference. And at the very end of the credits are rolling, they're playing a first clip of her, and she's saying, I had no choice. We had to do this, and I had to become a secretary, and, you know, we had to go along following orders, et cetera, et cetera. Then they've gone back over a subsequent months. Obviously, they've filmed footage with her and interviews with her. And then there's a later piece of footage where she comes back to that same question, and she says something completely different this time. She says, I could have chosen differently. And she said what made her realize that was after the war, she saw the memorial for Sophie Scholl, who was the same age as her and who was killed, her and her brother and the others who were part of the Peaceful White Rose anti-Nazi resistance group in Germany. And she said she saw that memorial and she realized she was the same age as me, and she was executed around the same time I started working for Hitler as a secretary. She said, and she says it's very powerful. She just says to the person who's interviewing her, I could have chosen differently. And there's something very powerful about all of that. So, yeah, Downfall. Great, just a great movie as far as I'm concerned. I suppose we should look now at before we get onto the Christmas section, let's see if we can even make that work. Honourable mentions, mate. What do you got on your list?
Okay, I'm just going to run through them real fast, and I'm only going to say something about a couple. But number 19, counting down to number 10, obviously. Number 19 is K-19. It's a sub-movie.
Oh, yeah. I like that film.
Yeah, I like that one a lot. Patton is number 18. Battle Cry is number 17. That's a World War II Marine Corps movie that's pretty good. The production's not real great, and it's kind of, but it's I like it. Number 16 is All Quiet on the Western Front. Yeah, both versions. Number 15 is Midway. Film. Yeah, loved it. 14 was The Longest Day. That's
the new one. That's the new one, right?
No, I like the old one.
Oh, okay. Yeah, good. I like both. Yep.
Yeah. 14 was The Longest Day. 13 is Apocalypse Now. 12 was Platoon. And 11 was We Were Soldiers.
So for me, then I'll start with my list, and that's all of your honourables, is it?
That's it.
Okay, so my honourables a bit longer. I'll show you how I've done mine. I've broken mine in two parts, and I'll do like you. I'll go quickly through them. But this first group were films that I really struggled. I wanted to put into my top 10, but I just couldn't, and I couldn't sort of make it work. So The first one's easy. It's Casablanca, but the reason
Oh.
it doesn't get in there is because it's actually a romantic drama set during World War II. So I thought,
I
well, that's easy.
almost
Yeah.
put that in. I almost
Yeah.
put that in at number 20, Casablanca.
I mean,
yeah.
yeah, that's a phenomenal, but it's not quite a war movie, so that was easy. Schindler's List, obviously
yeah.
important story, but I thought, it's not really about the war, it's about what happened to people during the war, so yep. 1917, phenomenal, just a singular, it's not, but it plays out like a singular shot, and that's the gimmick, but it works. It needs something a bit deeper to make it to the top 10, but it was a great film. Hacksaw Ridge, Desmond Doss, phenomenal. I was really gutted about not being able to include that one in the top 10. Heart's War, and I liked Heart's War, fictional tale, Bruce Willis, Colin Farrell, in a prisoner of war camp, and it's about exactly what you're talking about before, the duty to actually not just escape, but try and escape so they can sabotage an armaments plant. And it's this whole moral conflict of what's going on between these Allied soldiers. You know, is it right what Bruce Willis, the man in charge, is doing in there? So yeah, that's a great film. The Hurt Locker, a film about around Iraq and that theatre of war, and it actually it tells the story well. In a war that shouldn't really have happened, and there's all sorts of moral problems there, but it tells the story about the men involved in a way that's quite compelling. This one might seem a bit weird, but The Last of the Mohicans, and I thought, I can't really put it on because it's skirting the war, but...
You said that was outside the...
I know, and that's why I thought I can't put it in there, and Pete's going to go nuts if I say. So yeah, Last of the Mohicans, it's not a modern war. What do we say? Anything after, was it?
You said no. You
1850?
said everything had to be after the Civil War.
Yeah,
That'd be
after the Civil War.
1900s.
Yeah, and so that was absolutely in the Civil War. So I was like, no, that was an easy one not to include. The last two, Rambo, but the original one, but again, it's not a war movie. It's about a soldier. And so I thought I can't really put it in the top 10.
That's a good.
But,
I thought about putting that one in. First Blood.
Yeah, the first one.
Yeah.
And I think what's important about it is it's really about the vets from Vietnam. Thankfully, they didn't follow the book, because in the book he gets shot and killed. There's no sequels or anything. The sheriff, was it the sheriff or his friend? No, Troutman shoots and kills him. Yeah. And it's really dark, but it's trying to show you the awful horror and war of Vietnam and the treatment these men received. So but it wasn't a war movie. So I thought, no, it's about soldiers coming home from war. And the last one for me is From Hell to Eternity. And my dad introduced this to me when I was a kid. Young George Takei is in the movie, black and white film, based on a true story about a guy who went and fought in the Pacific Theater. But he was adopted by a Japanese family in America, and then he went to fight the Japanese. And it's he goes on this big sort of character arc where he at first he's not as hostile to the Japanese as his fellow soldiers are, and then he actually becomes a hero and captures a whole lot of them. But then he becomes a bit angry about it all and enraged, and there's like a PTSD because his friends get killed by the Japanese enemy in these brutal ways, and so he then flips to the other extreme and then comes back again to a more sort of moderate and humane person. And it's just a phenomenal film. It was funny when I used to tell people about that, like, oh, do you mean From Here to Eternity? Do you mean this other one? Because there's a few movies with that title in them. So but that was a great film. Now, so that was my ones that I sort of thought, I wish I could put them in the 10, but I can't. The ones that I didn't really think quite made it for me, but are honourables, Das Boot, which is the mini-series about submarines. And I remember that as a kid, watching that over several nights on TV. Masters of the Year, which was the third. It's really the third in the Band of Brothers TV series. So they had the Band of Brothers. They then had Pacific, which is about the Marines who fought in the Pacific. And that is one, Pete, that you were talking about before, I think, that actually does at times show you the hellishness of it. But it's not a movie. And then Masters of the Year. And Masters of the Year, unfortunately, is only available on Apple TV at the moment, but it's about the American airmen who are based in the UK and who were they were doing the bombing runs during the day. They were a lot more moral. The British had sort of said, we'll just go at night and we'll indiscriminately drop bombs. And what that meant was they weren't defining civilian versus military targets. The Americans said, no, that's not how we do things. We go during the day so we can target, and any civilians, it's collateral damage. It's not just dropping bombs. And so their casualty rate was far higher because you could see them during the day. You could target them with flak. You could attack them with fighter planes. It was, they really very, very, it was heroic stuff and very, very well told series. The Dirty Dozen for me made it in honourable mentions. Paths of Glory, which is a Stanley Kubrick, another Kubrick film about World War One. It's a black and white. It's only about an hour and a half long, and it's about it's got what's his name who was in Spartacus. Douglas, Kirk Douglas. Kirk Douglas. And Kirk Douglas plays a commanding officer who's given an order, a futile order, which would have slaughtered a whole lot of men. It was pointless. And so he chooses not to actually order his men over the top. He saves them, but then he's put on trial. He's court-martialed for it. And the film was about the court-martial. It's only about an hour and a half long, one of Kubrick's very early films, and it's a watchable film. Another one is Days of Glory. And this is not to be confused with Paths of Glory. I've got the DVD here. This is a very important film, actually. It's got our old borrow our DVD, return it to the right place sticker on it. But it's a French film, and it tells the true story. It came out in 2004 or 5, I think, from memory. And it tells the true story of the soldiers who fought for the French during World War II, but they're from the colonies, like the Algerians, the North Africans, who are in French-held territories, but they fought for the French, but they were treated as second-class citizens in the army. And then even worse, after the war had ended, they didn't get a pension like the rest of the soldiers. And so there's a question of justice in this film. It's a very well-made film. There's a question of justice of how they were treated. But it's also an important film because when it got released, early 2000s, so maybe 2005, something like that, the French government at the time, there was such a public sort of backlash about this that the French government reinstated the pensions for the surviving people, these elderly Islamic men, even in Algeria, who'd fought for the French against the Germans quite bravely. And so they actually, sadly, some of them were dead, but it actually caused a good outcome. And the last couple on my list are Valkyrie, the Tom Cruise one that tells the story about Klaus von Stauffenberg. Not necessarily the greatest film, could have done with a bit of a better director, but I think it's a very important moment in the war. Dunkirk's on there for me. Fury, which is about the tank. And I really like that one. Flags of Our Fathers, which is the companion film, and that's the other one, Pete, I think, which shows there's a moment where they show a battle sequence of the men landing at Iwo Jima, and they get there in the Marines, and then the hellish nature of what they faced. It's about 15, 20 minutes long, but you're right, it's not a whole film, but it's in there. And this one is kind of outside the box, but it is Godzilla -1, the new Godzilla film. And I know you're going to think, Brendan, this is Rango all over again, mate. What are you doing? But if you haven't seen this film, I saw this film after some friends of mine said, Brendan, watch this movie. You won't believe how good this film is. And I'm like, what? It's a Godzilla movie. What? It's a Japanese film. It's a subtitled film. It's not what you think. I thought it was just going to be, oh, here's a monster, everyone running away from a plastic-looking monster. It's amazing. And it actually is about these men who survived World War II. It's set immediately after World War II, returning to a ruined Japan, trying to re-establish their homeland, and also dealing with the whole film is about their PTSD. And the monster actually is a metaphor for their PTSD that followed them home. So the war causes Godzilla to arise, and then the monster follows them to the homeland. And this group of men, the ending is them saying, right, we will be men of virtue, and we will do this hard thing. We'll face this evil monster. No one else thinks we can succeed. We're totally outgunned, outnumbered, but we'll do it because this is what men must do. And it's really beautiful about these men finding healing. I honestly, you won't believe me until you've seen it. I didn't believe it when I first heard about it. I thought, no. But it's a phenomenal film. And as I said, it's really about PTSD. The monster appears a few times, and he's really a metaphor in the film. So yeah, that's my honourable mentions.
Those are good.
So, no Rango in there.
No Rango.
What about your Christmas picks, Pete? Do you have Christmas picks? Do you have any disagreements with me on any of my honourables? Did you think, no?
No. And see, I wouldn't have disagreed with Rango either if you hadn't put it in your top 10. It was an honorable mention. I'd be like, all right. But.
Oh, man. I still love it. I still go back and there's something about that film that just, man, you're right. It's not really, I mean, I probably was a bit rough putting in the top 10, but to be fair, it captures the spirit of the American Western, I think, in a way that.
All right.
It just works.
All right. So I've got 3 Christmas recommendations. Briefly, Number one, and these are not in any particular order, but
Yeah.
number one, there's a film called Saints and Soldiers.
Oh yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah,
Good film.
it's a pretty good war film. It tackles the questions of faith. There's some reciprocity. There's a German whose life is spared, and he later helps an American soldier. And I mean, there's it. You know, it's interesting. Side note: there's a scene in there where they're in a church. It's like a flashback scene. That actually was filmed in the Salt Lake City Cathedral.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and
But it's meant to be in Europe, isn't it, that scene?
well, no, it's a flashback to when he's at home.
Oh,
Before he
that's right.
goes to
That's right.
war.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the Salt Lake City Cathedral, it's very pretty, and it's interesting because one of the neat things about that cathedral is you can't see it in the film. Obviously, you could just kind of see they're in a big Catholic church, but they use a lot of like pastels and stuff in the Salt Lake City Cathedral. There's colors are not what you normally think of, and
Not
then
bright.
the Stations of the Cross. Jesus is portrayed as a Native American.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Because the Utah, the Utes, Indians, and everything else. It's interesting. But Saints and Soldiers, really good film. Clean, okay for the whole family.
Yeah.
Second one, Joy Noel.
Oh,
the story-
great film. Great film.
Yeah. So
About the soccer match. That's the one, right?
the Germans and the Allied forces all have a truce over Christmas, and there's the German opera singer that's there, and
That's right. Silent Night gets sung.
They exchange gifts, and so it's good. There's subtitles in the version I've seen. It's a good film.
Yeah, great.
And then my
choice.
third one is a TV episode.
Okay, your turn to cheat. Your turn to cheat.
Yeah. So
I'm actually Pete. I don't know if I can allow this, actually, mate.
yeah,
No,
shut up,
I'm only
Franco.
kidding.
Okay. So I'm a big fan of NCIS.
Oh yeah, good show.
I love NCIS, especially the first about 15, 14 seasons. I still watch it, but I really like early NCIS up until like I said, about season 14. Those are my first 14 seasons are probably my favorite. But in season 9, episode 11. So season 9, episode 11 is called Newborn King, and it takes place at Christmas. It's a cool episode. They're trying to protect this pregnant lady, and these people are out to get her because her son has ties to a royal family in Saudi Arabia or something. And anyway, I really like it, and it's kind of a cool episode. And the thing one of the things I really like about it, and this is all I'm going to say, but they juxtapose. Gibbs is helping this lady give birth, who's a Marine. She's a Marine, and Ziva David, the operative from Mossad, who is part of the NCIS team, is protecting them from the bad guys while this woman's giving birth. And so she's having this gunfight, hand-to-hand fight with these bad guys while Gibbs is helping this woman give birth. And Donald Belisario is a genius. He did Magnum PI, the original Magnum PI, which was the first TV show that portrayed Vietnam vets in a positive way. He's the mastermind behind NCIS, and he served in the Marine Corps. Donald Belisario did. But it's really interesting because he's got this whole thing happening because they're playing this Christmas song while this fight's happening, while this woman's giving birth. And it makes me think about this reflection I wrote one time about, it's an unwritten tradition, but it doesn't contradict our faith at all. But that I had this dream one time about the nativity. And I don't want to go into the whole dream, but part of the dream involved the stable, and it was surrounded by these 7 angels,
Yeah.
on the night that Christ was giving birth. I had this in a dream one time, so I wrote this reflection about it. And it certainly doesn't contradict our faith at all to believe that there were angels, guardian angels there surrounding that stable, protecting our newborn king, right? And so the name of the name of this episode is Newborn King. And I don't know how if Bill Lasaria was trying to draw some parallel there or not, but for me it does. And it's a really cool episode anyway. And it's only 42 minutes. So if your kids don't want to sit down and watch a long movie, they can watch Season 9, Episode 11 of NCIS. So.
That is brilliant, bro. That's slightly better than Rango. I think that's that's good. That's good. So I've got 4. Well, let's call them originals that didn't appear anywhere else on my list, and I've got another 3 that did. So I'll start with the 3 that did. Lawrence of Arabia would be a suitable if you got that long to sit down, but you may do if Christmas afternoon. You got not much else to do. Casablanca. It still holds up. Great film. And The Great Escape. I think those, easily, family could sit and watch those. Midway, but the new Midway for me, I know the critics didn't like this Midway. It's actually more historically accurate than Pearl Harbor was. And
Pearl Harbor
it
was terrible.
Yeah, I know. They really messed that up, right? And so this one tells about the Doolittle raid. It talks about the Battle of Midway. And I don't know why I know why the critics hated it, because it's not dark and cynical. It's kind of the old school movie that you don't really get much anymore, which is just like, here's these heroes doing this heroic thing. And that I think people are really jaded and they're like, yeah, but where's the darkness? Where's the gender identity confusion? They're looking for all that kind of stuff, and it's not that. And so Midway, it's got some war scenes in it, but yeah, it works. That's the recent one. It came out a couple of years ago. So Midway, and then there's the other 3 are Top Gun Maverick, and I think that qualifies as a war film.
I didn't think of that one.
Yeah, I know, and I like honestly that, and it is a very watchable family film, and the message is great. At the end, when he grabs, was it Rooster? Yeah, Goose's son, isn't it, Rooster? And I was trying to remember which bird it was. And he says to him at the end when they've got back, and he grabs him and he says, "Thank you for saving me." And he's saying, obviously, thank you for saving me on this mission, but he's also saying, thank you for saving me, teaching what fatherhood was. Like, you had taught me, I became like a surrogate dad to you. You let me be the father that, unfortunately was dead from the previous film. So I really like that film. And Tom Cruise, man, the last great movie star, really, I think it's fair to say. And the other 2, I did and ah about this one, but I thought, no, I'm definitely post Civil War here, I think, at this stage. I'm pretty sure I am, which was Master and Commander. So it's a
that's
naval.
a good film, yeah.
That is, yeah, and that's 1800s. So, yeah, I'm pretty sure we're safe there. So that's based on the novels. That's a great naval war film. And last but not least, and this is the one I was saying earlier, which is like, I think it's actually a combination of 2 different films. For me, it's a little bit less of a jaded version of, or a darker version of what was it? We were talking about earlier, Dirty Dozen. So it's got that kind of thing, the 70s thing going on, but it's not as dark and gritty, that's for sure. And it's also like, it feels like a cross between that, and I'm just trying to think of this George Clooney film. It was called Three Kings. Remember that Three Kings, they're in the first Iraq War, the first Gulf War, and they go and find the vault full of gold, and they steal it. These soldiers plan to steal the
I think I know where you're going with this one.
Yeah, and ship it home. So what do you think it is?
Is it Kelly's Heroes?
It is. It's Kelly's Heroes. It is absolutely Kelly's Heroes. And I watched this film, and it's great. And my kids happened to be there with me. They loved it. I
forgot about it till just now.
I know, it's phenomenal. Clint Eastwood. My kids. Don Rickles is in it, isn't he, as well? That's right. And
Donald Sutherland's in it.
That's right. My kids, my youngest daughter is always walking around. And even now, she walks around the house, and every now and then you hear "groovy baby," and she quotes that line from him when in his tank that he's painted up with the flower power stuff. And it's a great film. It's fun. It is kind of like the Dirty Dozen with a little bit of that Clooney movie in it. The heist, they go and steal the gold. But it's not dark and gritty, and there's nothing you have to be too careful about as a parent.
We used to say that sometimes we'd say stuff like, "What are you doing?" Like, eating some cheese, drinking some wine, catching a few rays.
Oh, brilliant, man. That is, yeah, it's just a great film. It works, bit of fun, well worth it. So yeah, Pete, we've done well here, mate, and you've held in there. It's, I'm looking at the time here, we're almost 2 hours. So, just about need a lie down after that. It's what time is it there for you now?
It's 6:25.
That's not too bad. Thankfully, I didn't intrude too much into your night. But all that's left to say is, aside from folks, if you haven't subscribed and liked the video, given it a thumbs up, and you're not going to share it with others, please do that. If you want to support us on Patreon, you can do that, patreon.com/leftfootmedia. There's a link in the show notes. But Pete, I just want to say a huge thank you to you. And if we don't get to speak beforehand, I should say Merry Christmas to you. I've got to go and edit this, but you can now go and relax. So thank you, my friend. You're always a gentleman and a scholar about these things.
We got to do another one on something.
I know. What's our next one? Top 10 animated films. Rango.
Top 10. I don't know. Oh, man. What about cop shows?
Oh, yeah, we could do that, actually. I had an idea the other night, and I should have written it down. I've forgotten it now. Slipped that in my mind. But I was thinking, what would be the next top 10 to do? So, yeah,
I'd say cop shows or comedies. Okay,
comedies, cop shows, or period films, maybe, like historical period films. Then you could do Civil War. So yeah, we've got a few things. Maybe Swords and Sandals, epics. Gladiator's going to be in there, surely.
We'll figure it out.
Rango. No, anyway, so Pete, it was awesome. Thank you, my friend. And God bless you and your family. And it's just great that you two are now parents and doing that whole thing. And you seem to have taken to it like a duck to water, my friend.
I love it.
It's a beautiful thing. Folks, thank you for tuning in. If we don't see you before, of course, have a Merry Christmas. A little bit early, but if we don't see you before, have a Merry Christmas. Thanks again for tuning in. Don't forget, live by goodness, truth, and beauty, not by lies. And I'll see you next time on Left Foot Media.